Hey, it's Aaron. Today, it's a new year, so I think we should look at what happened last year and how that's going to affect the industry going forward. So, three major things in automotive to look at. One is mergers, acquisitions, etc. The next is vehicle inventory and sales figures. And the third is recalls. So, let's start with mergers and acquisitions. There weren't any major ones in 2024, but we did have rumors and even announcements of pending ones. We're seeing Honda Nissan, that was the biggest one, which they're going to start negotiating that this month, and it may include Mitsubishi. That's kind of a big deal, but if we're looking at the industry as a whole, there are a handful of automakers that are ripe for this. Not necessarily major mergers between automakers themselves, but mergers that involve acquiring intellectual property and resources. So we're seeing a lot of buyout. We saw a bunch of it last year, and we're going to keep seeing that, where manufacturers are buying up intellectual properties for things like electrification and electric vehicles, and resources for the same, and also for things that may become difficult to get because of Chinese export or import problems, meaning things that can't get here because of things that might change legally, or things that may politically become a football that gets kicked around. So we're going to see a lot more merger, acquisition, and so on in those kind of terms. There's a couple of automakers to watch that may end up with some sort of buyout or sale, meaning they drop some of their brands or sell off some of their stuff, or they get bought out entirely. Stellantis is a big one of those. They are not doing terribly well financially, and their sales figures are dropping across their brand portfolio. So we may see some changes there. We may see some things get shed and sold off, or somebody come in and buy a ownership chunk to kind of save the day and try to steer them in a different direction. So that's kind of what's going on as far as mergers, acquisitions, etc. The next one on our list is we want to look at sales figures and inventory. So it's difficult to really pinpoint this, but if we're looking at 2024, what we saw was inventory growth and sales kind of stagnate until the last half of the year, and then they went up, but not by enough to make up for all of that. Now, inventory sizes this year are lower than, for across the board anyway, if you're averaging, they're lower than they were a couple, 3 years ago, when COVID started to hit and then people stopped buying cars, and then they dropped when right after that, if you recall that, and then they steadily started to grow, but up until now, up until about 2023, we were kind of the industry was playing catch up. There were lots of buyers, and it was really hard to make vehicles fast enough. Now we're at the other end of that again. Most auto manufacturers shoot for somewhere between 45 and 60 days, depending on the model and its sales figures. So on average, we usually see somewhere in that range for the number of vehicles or the number of days supply that automaker might have. And then sometimes they get lower than that, usually because sales suddenly jump or something interrupts manufacturing. Right now, Toyota, Lexus are the lowest on the scale. So I'm looking at the Cox Auto Inc. Numbers for November. These are the latest numbers I can get right now. And Lexus and Toyota are both in the 30-ish day range. They're somewhere around 30 to 35 days. After that, you have Honda, which is at about 62, and a handful of other manufacturers that are between 60 and about 80. Then we start to see domestic brands that are struggling. So there's a handful of these, and import brands that usually have high inventory this time of year anyway, like such as Mazda. But really, the worst of them are the brands that are having the hardest time selling. The worst out of all of those is Mini at 129, but right even with them is Jeep, and then you've got Ram, Buick, and Ford, all in that same kind of 125 to 130 range. And then you've got a couple of other ones like Nissan and Dodge and Audi that are well over 100, and then it goes down from there. So what this total trend is showing is that the industry itself is actually at a pretty high average. Pretty close to 90 days is the total average for the industry. And that is not a good sign. The average listing price for a vehicle right now is $48,000. That has fluctuated a little bit, but has continued to climb for the last 4 or 5 years at least, but it's been an upward trend since the industry started. Inflation, costs, other stuff, they all play into that. So we're looking at some pretty high inventory numbers right now. Some of this inventory is not 2025 model year stuff. So you're going to see way more cash on the hood. We're just starting to see that right now after the new year here, but we're going to see that a lot in the coming next month or two, as dealerships try to just shed that 2024 stuff so they can concentrate on the new model year. Now, the next thing to look at are recalls. So recalls in 2024 were lower in total than they were in 2023, and that was a very peak year. Ford in particular basically cut its recall count in half, which is really impressive. And at this point, about a third of all recalls issued by so these are official recalls, not recalls just announced by the company but never registered. So these are recalls that are from the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, or NHTSA. These are actual recalls issued, so they were issued through the federal system. So it won't count a bunch of recalls that were done that were not registered that way, namely Tesla recalls that were over-the-air updates. But it's worth noting that the industry at this point has about 33% of its recalls are over the air. Big strides were made in that case, or in that instance, by companies like Ford, Hyundai, and so on. So we're seeing a lot of that. But official recall counts for the year, the total for 2024, the highest on that list was the FCA or Stellantis, so Chrysler, Fiat, etc., at 72 is their total count. Ford was right behind them at 67, and then BMW North America at 59. And then after that, they drop pretty fast. Mercedes was not too high at 34. Hyundai was right at 25, I think it is, and so on. So the numbers drop precipitously. General Motors was up there. They're in the top 5 at 34. So most of the recalls that happened this year in terms of which companies were the worst is Fiat, Chrysler, etc., so Stellantis brands, and Ford. So yeah, that's kind of the state of the industry right now. We're doing pretty okay, but not great. The market right now is a little over flush as far as vehicles go, and consumer confidence in a lot of brands is not great right now. And then, of course, high costs and the high cost of loans on top of that. So, but we're still seeing a lot of the same. The top 5 vehicles being sold right now are the same, pretty much the same vehicles they've been for the last 5 years. So, people are still buying what people want to buy. So, yeah, that's kind of where the industry is. Hopefully this kind of gives you a heads up, or at least a good foothold to see what 2025 brings. All right, this has been Aaron. Talk to you again soon.